From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's ahead. From K-State's Cover Your Acres Winter Conference earlier this week out of Texas A&M, Jourdan Bell discusses her multi-year research on water use by weeds in dryland cropping systems. Her findings really illustrate just how extensive that water use is, reinforcing the value of good, comprehensive weed control. Then K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti previews the series of Kansas Corn Schools, co-sponsored by K-State, and the first of which takes place tonight in a virtual format. And on this week's horticulture feature, K-State's Cheryl Boyer talks about new ornamental flower varieties that have been named 2021 All-America selections. All that here on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Thanks for joining us for Agriculture Today. Well, even though it was held virtually, chalk it up still as a highly successful event. K-State's 2021 Cover Your Acres Winter Conference took place yesterday afternoon, and kudos to K-State's Lucas Haig and his research and extension team for making it click. Right here today, some of the remarks of the lead-off presenter at Cover Your Acres yesterday. She reported on her research into the water use of weeds in dryland cropping systems. Jourdan Bell is an extension agronomist with Texas A&M University, based in the Texas High Plains region, and over the last several years near Bushland, Texas, Jourdan's been running trials on measuring, in precise terms, how much water common weeds are robbing from crops, especially early on in crop establishment.
Every producer notices the impact of weed pressure on just the crop physiological development. And we are all told that weeds use water and nutrients and even light. But we really don't have any data until now for the Southern Great Plains to quantify weed water use. It really does become extremely important for us to manage every drop of water. And when we consider the allocation of water by weeds, and I guess the reallocation, we do not want to be wasting water. And especially because irrigation and or precipitation is necessary to stabilize that crop production. So what we came in and did was establish very small, just weed plots. We had 5 square foot plots, and they were replicated 3 times. We had 5 different weed species: redroot pigweed, morning glory, velvet leaf, barnyard grass, and kochia. Each plot we had neutron tubes in order to estimate the volumetric water content of the soil. And then we also had microlysimeters so that we can actually only measure the evaporation, the change in water content in the soil. And so what we did for 2 years after we planted weed seeds and right before germination is weigh these microlysimeters every morning at sunrise and every evening at sunset. And we did this at germination and then seedling establishment and then till we got to canopy closure. So when we talk about crop water use, of course, we are talking about the evaporation from the soil surface plus transpiration from the crop. And most of all of our volumetric water sensors are measuring total crop water use. We're getting just the change in the water content in the soil, and that includes what that plant is using. So it's E and T. And then, as I mentioned, the microlysimeter, we're only measuring the evaporation from the soil surface. So that allows us to very easily take our total ET minus the evaporation and get just T, the transpiration. So that is how we calculated how much water those weed species were using.
And this research concentrated on weed activity and control early in the growing season because that's where the water use action, if you will, sets the tone for the cash crop. In the case of Jourdan's research, dryland corn.
Really what I was interested in was just the early season weed use and really focusing on the 4 to 6 inch weed. And that is because when we look at our herbicide labels, and we're thinking about best management practices, we know that we're wanting to control actually weeds, in that 2 to 4 inch range. And so we were really focusing on smaller weeds so that we could quantify the water use at this period.
Now, thanks to the year-to-year variations in the weather, Jourdan was able to come up with a good representative profile of weed water use.
So in 2017, we did have very wet conditions in the Texas Panhandle, and that actually lasted throughout much of the summer. So when we look at our total ET environmental conditions, it was cool. We had many of our days, even in the heat of the summer, were upper 80s to low 90s, just great growing season. But that did result in just, lower environmental demand. And so what we saw is pigweed. So 2017, we're looking at a little over 1.5 millimeters. So, about 0.06 of an inch per day in 2017. So we go, okay, well, that's not too bad. But nevertheless, there's some other weeds in here that are pretty big water users. Velvet leaf, morning glory. Of course, I will admit, I've always been told kochia is poor man's alfalfa. And it's amazing to see how well kochia grows, how vigorously it grows in a dryland field. And this is why that plant does not need much water. Now, 2018 was a completely different story. It was hot and dry in 2018, and we really saw the environmental demand drive the water use in 2018. Looking at pigweed, our ET, at this 4 to 6 inch weed stage, we are looking at a little over 12 millimeters per day. So that's 0.5 inch per day for our total ET. Now, of course, just talking about transpiration, 4 millimeters per day. So that's still pretty significant. We're right there about 0.15 of an inch per day. Now, again, our other weeds, we're still kind of right there in line, about 3 to 3.5 millimeters per day. Kochia was actually just minuscule. So again, very surprising, kochia in that sense, how little water it actually needs to survive and be vigorous. So right now we're seeing that we are definitely, robbing that water. A poorly maintained weed field is competing with our primary crops. So it was pretty shocking to see how much water those weeds were actually using.
The math makes it clear, says Jourdan. Water consumption by weeds directly translates to crop yield loss, and therefore well-conducted weed control, particularly early on in the season, does pay for itself, she says, when all is said and done.
At that 4 to 6 inch weed stage, we're using about 1 to 4 millimeters per day. And so that's cumulatively, we're looking at about 0.3 to 1.1 inches per week. So, right there, we're looking at our irrigation demand. And when we think about a weed using up to 1 inch of water per week, that's really significant. So a combination of several poorly controlled weed species results in significant water usage by weeds at the expense of our crop water use. And in semi-arid regions with limited irrigation, poorly controlled weeds can result in a significant yield loss. And so it really is important for producers to recognize the economic return of their herbicide investment. And especially in the High Plains, as the Oglala aquifer has continued to decline and our irrigation capacity for irrigated corn continues to decrease, I routinely receive questions from producers, what's a good generic? And, they want the cheapest herbicide program as possible. And while there's a lot of really good generics out there, that's something that I've really tried to refocus on, is using this data to really justify the return on that herbicide investment.
And with the full accent, she says, on those pre-plant treatments.
we are looking at a period where our internode elongation is started by V6. We are forming those yield components, our nodal root development. By the time we get to that V6, V8 stage has really taken off. Our leaves are developing. Our growing point has now moved above the soil surface, and specifically nutrient and water requirements are accelerating. And so we see the impact from the weed pressure at that point. And I think everyone agrees on that, what we saw because of that early season weed pressure, that those pre-plant herbicides are definitely the most cost-effective herbicide treatment of the season. And that is because we begin to see the effects of early season weed pressure on biomass and yield loss. And so even though, of course, we run into issues where it rains and we don't get those pre-plants out, and, it seems like we're constantly trying to spend the rest of the season catching up for what we did not get done pre-plant. And it becomes more expensive just to play catch up and a greater risk for yield loss.
As a footnote, this multi-year research was again conducted in the Texas Panhandle at Bushland, just west of Amarillo. Jourdan maintains that her findings are certainly applicable to high plains crop production here in Kansas as well.
Just depending on the year, depending on environmental conditions that drive ET, we could see different numbers, maybe more elevated numbers in some cases. But I do know that y'all can face pretty extreme conditions too. And we get into the peak of the summer, it's possible y'all could have some pretty high water demand from your weed species. Although I will say, you can grow a much better dryland corn crop in Northwest Kansas than we can in the Texas Panhandle. So that's a plus for y'all.
Jourdan Bell there, Extension Agronomist with Texas A&amp AgriLife on water use by weeds in dryland crop production. Now, if you missed it, her presentation at the Cover Your Acres conference is worth taking in. K-State will soon be releasing the recordings of that and the other presentations. Go to northwest.ksu.edu/coveryouracres to gain access to those when they're posted very soon. northwest.ksu.edu/coveryouracres. This is Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, and here we'll talk corn and several informational opportunities for you producers coming up. Ignacio Ciampitti is with us once again. As you know, Ignacio is a crop production and cropping systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension. The most immediate thing that we want to cover here today, Ignacio, this series of 2021 Kansas Corn Schools. K-State has partnered with Kansas Corn on these, the first of which is, in fact, this evening. Tell us about these learning sessions, what they'll be providing in the way of information.
Thanks, Eric, as always, for the invitation. Yes, as you know, this year the format is completely virtual. And then the idea is that we start discussing about, with Kansas Corn, about options on webinars. And then we partner, again, with Kansas Corn, specifically to provide some level of education, looking at all the schools, at all the success that we have in the last several years on looking at management, looking at main topics concerning production, and then also specifically focusing more on the economics policy. So looking at this, we basically established 3 different webinars. One is today, January 21st. Next one will be in 2 weeks, on February 4th. And the last one will be a week after, on February 11th. And the topics are quite different, I would say, in terms of management. We will start today specifically looking at nutrient management and production. So we'll have Dori Barruiz Diaz discussing on nutrient management and fertility, and we'll have myself discussing a little bit about the main production topics. These are main key topics for the first webinar. The format will be 25-30 minutes with Dr. Ruiz Diaz on fertility, and then we'll move 25, 30 minutes to the management practices. And then towards the end, we'll have an open format looking at the questions that they came from the audience and trying to provide good answers on the questions. We also have an opportunity that any questions that were not answered due to time, because our main goal is to keep the webinars between 7 p.m., 8:30 p.m., so trying to keep this in an hour and a half. Some of those questions that they remain unanswered are the ones that basically will be back and we will provide information on these questions and then responses after the webinar. And then if you look at the other topics, the following 2 weeks, we'll have an excellent critical topic also on weed control. We'll bring technology to the sessions with Dr. AJ Sharda, looking at planter technology. Weed control will be done by Dr. Sarah Lancaster, that she will be looking specifically on the weed control topic, which is usually very controversial, very relevant for corn and for many crops. And then the last session that will be run on February 11th is specifically looking at market and future prices. We'll have Dr. Dan O'Brien as a first speaker on that webinar, and then we'll close with all the Kansas Corn Grower Association policy achievements with Josh Rowe, that also will be looking at, from Kansas Corn, all the different changes on the policy side for the crop. I think that these are excellent sessions. Mm-hmm. We try to keep it short. This will be run from 7 p.m. again to around 8:30 p.m. So trying to keep it short, 1 hour and a half. There are still opportunities to register, even to register for the webinar that we'll have today. One of the options is you can go to Kansas Corn, kscorn.com/corn school. So you get there into the website, you go to the end of the website and you say register for corn school webinars. When you register, basically you will get an email notification with the Zoom link to connect to the meeting. Important also, the webinars are, as mentioned before, partnership between Kansas Corn and Kansas State Research and Extension. And then the primary sponsors, are also connected to Pioneer Brand Seeds and also supporting a sponsor, Compass Minerals. For all the different webinars, we'll have other sponsors and we'll have the chance and opportunity to really have, I think that it will be excellent sessions of question and answer towards the end. And even a great opportunity to hear the latest research, production information, so hear update on markets and policy, and really have a kind of a nice evening session of interaction with our key researchers on many topics.
It's a great lineup from seminar to seminar to seminar each of the next 3 Thursday evenings. Just for a sneak peek, if we might, Ignacio, you'll be talking about management practices in corn during the session tonight. What, briefly here, are some of the high points you'll be hitting there?
So as you know, most of the times, still very critical topics, on corn, looking at plant density. We will take a retrospective analysis on where we were on plant density and where we are today, and really discuss briefly about the progress that we did on looking at fine-tuning and selecting the right plant density. That is one aspect. We'll briefly touch base on nitrogen. We know that fertilizer, and the nitrogen is one of the key management for corn. And then towards the end, we will start looking at some of the new data that we are collecting from high-yield contest winners to try to understand a little bit about the best management practices that they do and what are the key factors when we are looking about improving corn productivity. Lastly, and probably not least, we will be discussing very briefly about this project that we are conducting that is on tillering, that many people is asking, what is that? Right. So we will be talking very briefly. We have a kind of a state-level project looking at the effect of tillers. As you know, the tillers are these axillary buds. So if you look at layman terms, it's a kind of another plant that is coming from the main plant. And then the ability of having ears and making and producing additional ears is something that we investigate specifically with heavily focus on central to western locations in the state. So we will provide an update on that project, and we have some, I think that is quite exciting and still with a lot of questions that remain unanswered. But very excited about looking at that opportunity for exploring how we can improve production for corn in Kansas.
Excellent. Well, once again, we'll repeat how to take part in these corn schools in just a second. But you mentioned the tillering. That actually is one of the new features in something else we wanted to quickly bring up here, Ignacio. K-State's updated Kansas Corn Management Guide. It's now out, and one of the new sections does, in fact, cover this tillering topic, you say.
Yeah, tillering is one of the key topics, and brand new on the sense that there has been a lot of research on tillering from the eastern states, Indiana, Illinois, and this data is probably dated from the 80s and the 90s. There were a few questions in the last couple of years of farmers thinking about, is there really a big contribution on tillers in corn? Can tillers really help and be productive and increase yield in corn? And to be honest, we didn't have any information at all in terms of what would be the potential contribution of tillers for corn in our region. So this was one of the main things that we started conducting several studies in multiple locations, and we focus on just the last 2 years. 2018 started just exploratory analysis, but then the main 2 years were 2019 and the 2020. So very fresh, new data, looking at insights on how we can start really understanding much further what is the real contribution of tillers and what might be places where there might be opportunities and places where we are fine in the way that we are at this point.
Well, that's just one of multiple topics that the Corn Management Guide covers: planting practices, plant density, as Ignacio noted a moment ago, as related to yield gain, weed management, pest management of all kinds, nutrient management. It's all there. And how can producers obtain this Corn Management Guide in its newest form, Ignacio?
So for any producer that want to get access to this, all this information is available in the KSRE bookstore. And it's not as complicated. I mean, you can just Google for that information. But if you just go to a K-State website, you will go to a KSRE bookstore. And then if you go to the section on crops, you go to corn, and then immediately you will start seeing the new publications. This one, as Eric mentioned, this is one of our newest publications, our 2021 crop management for corn.
Once more, it's an easy search, the K-State Research and Extension bookstore, and you're looking for the Kansas Corn Management publication for 2021. Check that out, and again, take part in one of these webinars coming up, and we'll repeat the information on how to register for that in just a second. Ignacio, we wish you the very best with these as they're coming up quite soon. Thanks for taking a look ahead to them with us right here.
Thanks, Eric, as always, for having this chance and the opportunity and the invitation.
That's Ignacio Ciampitti, crop production and cropping systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension. This series of 2021 Kansas Corn Schools in webinar form online, the first session this evening, and then the subsequent two, Thursday, February the 4th and Thursday, February the 11th. All of these start at 7 o'clock in the evening, run until around 8:30. Get more information and register online at kscorn.com/cornschool. kscorn.com/cornschool. After this break, today's agricultural news headlines are coming your way, and this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update with Greg Akagi, as well as this week's horticulture feature, all that still ahead here on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today, our Thursday edition, and thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here. Now it's on to today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, farm organizations largely issued statements yesterday extending their congratulations to President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris and declaring that they're looking forward to working with the new Biden administration. The president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, Zippy Duvall, noted that in the last several weeks there have been difficult times for all Americans, but the country is moving forward, in his words. He said, quoting here, "We have peacefully ushered in new leaders and with them new appreciation for the resilience of our democracy," again in his words. And the president of the National Farmers Union, Rob LaRue, pointed to the multiple crises of the lives claimed by the pandemic and the economic struggles it has caused. LaRue added in his words that Biden and Harris have surrounded themselves with highly qualified and diverse advisors and staff who will help guide them through these thorny issues, again in his words. Both LaRue and Duvall also stressed some major agricultural challenges that need to be addressed. LaRue, in his comments, said the agriculture industry is also coping with its own internal battles. He cited an overt dependence on exports, crumbling rural infrastructure, and an aging farm population, just to name a handful. And Duvall said some of the needs include strengthening the Farm Bill, expanding trade, and finding a fair solution to the farm labor shortage. He said that we must extend broadband coverage to ensure that rural families, businesses, schools, and healthcare facilities can compete in today's digital reality. Payments under the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program 2 totaled $13.2 billion as of this past Monday. According to the Farm Service Agency data, 891,000 applications approved. That total includes $6.2 billion in acreage-based payments, $3.4 billion for livestock, $2.3 billion for sales commodities, $1.2 billion for dairy, and $56 million for eggs and broilers. The total for CFAP 1 is put at $10.5 billion, including $5 billion for livestock, $2.5 billion for non-specialty crops, $1.8 billion for dairy, $930 million for specialty crops, and $119 million for aquaculture and flora crops. The latest totals for the two programs do not appear to include any of the top-up payments to hog producers under CFAP 1, and producers were able to start amending their prior CFAP applications on January the 19th for additional assistance announced by the USDA on January the 15th. And Tyson Foods announced a $221.5 million settlement in an ongoing class action antitrust lawsuit filed against chicken broiler companies. That's according to a filing with the U.S. Securities Exchange Commission this week. It's the second announced settlement in a lawsuit filed by Maple Vale Farms back in 2016 in the U.S. District Court for the District of Northern Illinois. Pilgrim's Pride announced a $75 million settlement last week. The lawsuit alleges a number of large chicken-producing companies, including Pilgrim's Pride, Tyson, Koch Foods, and others, beginning at least as early as January of 2008, quoting here, conspired and combined to fix, raise, maintain, and stabilize the price of broilers, as the lawsuit reads. While the company does not admit any liability as part of the settlements, it believes that the settlements were in the best interests of the company and its shareholders in order to avoid the uncertainty, risk, expense, and distraction of the protracted litigation. That was Tyson's statement in this SEC filing. The lawsuits were filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois in Rockford. The Maple Vale Farms lawsuit alleged chicken companies cut production in order to drive up broiler prices. And a quick reminder that K-State Agricultural Economics is presenting the Finances and the Farm series. It's an online class to enhance farm management skills, and one can take these at their convenience. 6 lessons on record keeping, balance sheet, income statements, cash flow, goal setting, and managing family living expenses. It's a self-paced course, and one can find out more about taking it and what's involved by going to agmanager.info. Finances and the Farm out of K-State Agricultural Economics. Agmanager.info has all the details. Check that out. Now on to this week's Kansas soybean update. With that, Greg Akagi. Greg?
Teresa Brandenburg is joining us. She is from Osborne and also serves as president of the Kansas Soybean Association. And Teresa, in light of not having the Kansas Soybean Expo this year, the Kansas Soybean Association and Commission both met for a virtual meeting
Yeah, we wish that we were getting together to be able to recap Expo, but we know that this year has just not gone the way we wanted. So we wanted to make sure we gave our association members the opportunity to still join in on our annual meeting. So back in January, the association had their regular board meeting in Topeka. We were socially distanced at a hotel, and then we offered our members the opportunity to come in at noon via Zoom to be there for our annual meeting so that we could conduct the business of the association.
And what were some of the highlights of the meeting?
The basic tenet of association meeting every year is we had to confirm policy changes. There weren't very many this year. What most people don't understand is that there are two entities in Kansas that serve soybean farmers. The Kansas Soybean Commission handles the checkoff dollars, but the association is completely member funded. And we are the hand that can actually do legislative work both in Topeka and in Washington, D.C. So association members get the opportunity at the annual meeting to vote to approve our legislative priorities for the year.
And in those policy resolutions, there was just a couple of changes.
The biggest change that we made is that we support the idea that all agricultural workers are essential. In case anything should happen again where shutdowns should happen, we wanted to make it clear that the Kansas Soybean Association understands that agriculture and its support system must keep going because people need to continue to have access to safe, affordable food. We really miss being able to be in the same room as all of our farmer members, but we know that this is hopefully not forever, and we're looking forward to maybe being able to get together with everyone in the summer. We're trying to plan some of those things. Really, the work of the association is just making sure that we are a presence and a voice for the Kansas soybean farmer, and that's what we're worried about every time we get together. Our annual meeting, we also voted to fill some spots on the board, and then we added new DuPont Young Leader to the board, so Kendall Heiniger is joining the board. Then after the association meeting, we held a reorganizational meeting where we elected officers.
That is Teresa Brandenburg. She is a producer from Osborne and serves as president of the Kansas Soybean Association as she joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg. And this is Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so stay a minimum of 6 feet away from others and stay home if you can. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Agriculture Today continues now. It's our weekly horticulture segment for you, and we are following up on information that we started this past week on the All-America selections and how they might fit here in Kansas. To remind us of what those are and to take a look at the ornamentals on the list this year, Cheryl Boyer, nursery crops horticulturist with K-State Research and Extension. Cheryl, good to have you back again, and this All-America selection process. Quickly remind us of what it is before we actually pass along some names of some outstanding plant material out there.
Yeah, well, good morning, and thanks for having me. The All-America Selections program is truly the only fully national plant trial system that we have. And the reason for that is that there are an extensive number of new cultivars, cultivated varieties that are introduced to the market on an annual basis, like hundreds. So breeders select their plants that they think have the best chance of doing well across the United States. And I can tell you from experience that just trying to get a group of plants to perform well across Kansas is quite the challenge. I mean, even just in Kansas, you can break us up into 6 to 9 different growing regions just based off of heat and cold and drought and all of those different aspects. So to get a plant or any number of plants that can survive conditions across the country is quite a feat. That's the purpose of a plant trial.
Was there a fair amount of plant material, and again, ornamentals, on the list that you see has a good future here in Kansas?
Well, there are some that I would like to talk about. So the first of those are a couple of zinnias, and I looked at both the 2020 and the 2021 winners because there were a few more for 2020. And hey, we were just in 2020. And zinnias, I mean, you really can't go wrong with zinnias. You can get them in just about any color. They're tough as nails. And so I think generally what they're looking for when there are new varieties of zinnia are flower color and maybe the way the plant grows or the size of the flower. So the two that I'm going to talk about, the first one is called Zinnia Profusion Red Yellow Bicolor. And as you can imagine, it has two colors in the flower head. So the center of it is a red, and then the outer parts of the petal are yellow. So that gives it a really interesting two-toned presence. And there's lots of fairly small flowers, and they're fairly simple. When I say simple, I mean as opposed to lots and lots and lots of petals, and maybe a little bit difficult for pollinators to get their feeding parts into the flower. These are smaller and a little bit wider open, but there's lots of them. It's on a compact plant. So that one is Zinnia Profusion Red Yellow Bicolor. And then the other zinnia is called Holy Pink F1. And F1 is a breeding term. And it is bright pink, lots and lots of petals. The plant itself is a little bit taller than the other one, so it's not quite as low growing, but it does have these really large flowers, and that's an interesting characteristic for that zinnia.
So a couple of showy zinnias on offer, it sounds, off of this list. Other ornamental flowers that have caught your attention, Cheryl?
Yeah, so we have some zinnias tend to be annuals. Some perennials include Rudbeckia and Echinacea, which some people have trouble telling apart. They can look very similar in some cases. But the two Rudbeckia that made the list is one of them is called Amarillo Gold. And as you can imagine, it's a yellow color, a bright yellow color. The flowers are about 2 to 3 inches wide, and the plants are about 12 to 18 inches tall. So it's a little bit taller of a variety, but Rudbeckia grow really well here. The other one is called American Gold Rush. So that's a fun one to remember. And its flowers, the petals are a little bit more separated, and it's a little bit lighter of a yellow color, and the center of it is a little bit darker. So those two Rudbeckias, you can't really go wrong with Rudbeckia. An Echinacea is also in there, and the one that made the list is from a series called Sombrero, and this one is Baja Burgundy, and it's a reddish color, and I have been very impressed with everything from the Sombrero series altogether. So if you can find that in a garden center, buy it. They have been really good performers in our landscapes here in Kansas, and they come in lots of different colors, and they're all really kind of unique. So Rudbeckia, Echinacea, Sombrero series, can't go wrong.
And you say there is a new mum on offer now?
Yeah, so there's a new mum. It's called Sweet Daisy Birdie, and it has white petals with a yellow center, but just around the edge. It's got these smaller little tiny flowers. They're also white, so it almost gives sort of a cream look to the center. So that's a really interesting new mum. And, I have one last one that I wanted to talk about if we have time for that.
Sure.
And that is a coleus. So coleus is a plant that's recognized for its foliage color. So not necessarily its flowers, but for the brightness and color of the leaves. So the coleuses have improved dramatically over the last decade or so. And they used to be full sun plants. Now many of them can take full sun, full shade, anywhere in between, in the ground, in a pot. They just do great. So the one that made the list in 2020 is called Main Street Beale Street. And so Main Street is the series. I have not seen a loser from the Main Street series. So if you can find a coleus from the Main Street series, they come in lots of different interesting characteristics on the leaf with different variegations and main colors, but they all performed well in Kansas. And this particular one, Beale Street, made it to the national list, which is pretty good options for us.
Great verbal descriptions there, Cheryl, but to do it full justice, gardeners would want to see what these look like as well. And is there a resource they can go to review these All-America ornamental selections for this year?
There sure is. So All-America Selections has a website. It's all-americaselections.org, or you can just search in your browser for All-American Selections, and it will pop right up. They have a great website with lots of color photos, information about the program, and just lots to explore. But it's a simple format. It's not an overwhelming website, and there's lots of great photos. And it includes the vegetables. And I also would put a plug in real quick for our Kansas resource, which is kansasroots.org. And it's also a plant selection tool that's just for Kansas, and it has all of our recommended plants on it as well.
Very well. Hey, thanks for this quick review of the All-America selections on the ornamental side, a number of flowering plants that our home gardeners might well want to take a look at as we approach another growing season. Appreciate your time, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
She's Cheryl Boyer, nursery crops horticulturist, K-State Research and Extension, with us on this week's Horticulture Feature. Thanks for listening in. Please rejoin us here tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.